into the cloud server. Okay. So today we will be talking about the last 6 minor prophets in our English canon, which is Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And also they are the last 6 latter prophets of the Hebrew canon. So first, we're going to talk about Nahum. Okay? Nahum. I mean Hosea, right? No, Nahum. And let me, okay. So Nahum, regarding the title and authorship of this book, according to Nahum chapter 1, verse 1, the prophet Nahum is described as the Elkoshite, which suggests that Nahum came from a town called Elkosh, but the site of such a city is unknown. Okay, and Nahum, the name Nahum means consolation or comfort. And you know what? In the Old Testament, and you know this, that their names have meanings. It has a value. Right now, people name their children with names that don't have any value at all. Okay, my name Atan doesn't have any meaning at all. Okay, it comes from my. I am named after my father and my grandfather. Okay, that's why I am the third. Okay, but in the Old Testament times, their names have meanings, and there is a purpose why Nahum is named Nahum. Okay, it means consolation or comfort. And perhaps he is named that way because his message about the destruction of Nineveh, a city dreaded by many nations in that day, would have been, okay, a great comfort, a consolation to the people of Judah. So let's talk about the city of Nineveh and let us trace the history of this city. Okay, do you know who built the city of Nineveh? You remember in the book of Genesis? Starts with letter N. This person was the one who built the city of Nineveh. His name is Nimrod, according to Genesis chapter 10, verse 11. And let me read to you that verse, Genesis 10, 11. Okay? Okay. Okay, for example, in Genesis chapter 10 and verse 9, Nimrod was described as a mighty hunter before the Lord. And then he built these cities, according to verse 11, Nineveh, okay? And the city of Rehoboth, Kala, Resen, between Nineveh and Kala. So he built a lot of cities, and one of them is Nineveh. So Nimrod built this, and it was expanded by Tiglath-Pileser. I don't know how to pronounce his name, Tiglath-Pileser or Tiglath-Pileser, in 1115-1071 BC. Okay, and Tiglath-Pileser is the Assyrian king who referred to himself as king of the world. And years after this, in the 9th, 8th, and 7th centuries BC, the Assyrian Empire became strong and repeatedly attacked nations to the east, north, and west. And of course, they also attacked the nation of Israel. So they expanded, okay, their kingdom in the Assyrian Empire. And it was during the time of Shalmaneser III when Israel came into contact with Nineveh. Shalmaneser III made Nineveh a base for military operations. And it was in the reign of Ashur-dan III, okay, when Jonah preached to the Ninevites. And it is highly possible that when Jonah preached to the Ninevites, King Ashur-dan III came to know Yahweh, okay, as the only God, okay. In 731 BC, okay, Ahaz, king of Judah, became a vassal of Tiglath-Pileser III. And of course, in 722 BC, that's a landmark year for the nation of Israel. What happened in 722 BC? Okay. The northern kingdom was defeated, right? The captivity of the northern kingdom by the Assyrian Empire. So during this time, the one who was reigning was Shalmaneser V. Okay, he besieged Samaria and defeated the northern kingdom. Okay, that's 722 BC. And in 701 BC, or 21 years later, okay, after the defeat of the northern kingdom, Sennacherib invaded Judah and destroyed 46 Judean towns and cities. If you remember, I think in the book of Isaiah, that's recorded, the invasion of Sennacherib. Okay, so the Assyrian Empire, they are hungry of territories. They tried to expand their kingdom. So they already defeated the northern kingdom. They also would like to defeat the southern kingdom. That's why in 701 BC, they destroyed some Judean cities and towns, okay, trying to destroy also the southern kingdom. But God intervened, okay? Sennacherib's armies numbering 185,000, just imagine that, were killed overnight. And Sennacherib returned to Nineveh. Okay, we can read this account in 2 Kings 19:32 to 36 and in Isaiah 37 verse 36. And let me read to you that. Isaiah 37:36. The angel of the Lord, it was an angel of the Lord, okay, smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000 were killed just by one angel. Okay. Isang angel lang yun. 185,000 na ang namatay. How much more? It's a legion of angels, right? I think a legion of angels composed of 6,000 angels. Remember when Jesus Christ, when he was arrested, he said that I can call a legion of angels to help me. Okay, just imagine that. 6,000 angels for what? I think, as far as I remember, a legion is composed of 6,000 angels. But one angel during this time was able to kill 185,000 Assyrians. Excuse me. In 669, Esarhaddon reigned as king of Assyria and replaced by his son Ashurbanipal in 669 BC. And finally, the city of Nineveh fell to the Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians in August 612 BC. So this is a very important date in world history. The Assyrian Empire, okay, fell in 612 BC. If I ask you, when was the Northern Kingdom defeated? What's your answer? When was the Northern Kingdom, Israel, defeated by the Ninevites, by the Assyrians?
7 BC.
722 BC, okay? Always remember that. That's a very important date, okay? And in 612 BC, okay, 100 years later, the proud Assyrian Empire collapsed, okay? Nothing in this world lasts, okay? So we can say that no matter how great, how powerful you are or a kingdom is, it will eventually come to an end, okay? So that's the history of Nineveh or the Assyrians, okay? Jonah described Nineveh as a great city, okay? Jonah chapter 1 verse 2. But remember that Jonah ministered to the Ninevites in 760 BC. In 760 BC. So nagkaroon ng revival sa Assyria during the time of Jonah. But what happened during the time of Nahum? Okay? So a lot of people forgot the revival. Okay? Or maybe the parents, okay, who were present during the revival of Jonah did not relate to their children, okay, the truth that they have learned during the revival. So nagkaroon ng regression, okay, morally and spiritually sa Assyria, okay, after the revival. When Nahum came, he prophesied judgment against Nineveh or the Assyrian Empire, and it collapsed in 612 BC. And Jonah also, okay, so that's how Jonah described Nineveh. It's a great city, a powerful city. And let me read to you this quotation, okay? How Nineveh or how Assyria was destroyed. The city's ruins are still evident today, even until present. The city was easily overtaken when the Kush River, which flowed through it, overflowed its banks. And who do you think sent those waters? Of course, it's God who is in control over everything, okay? So this was documented in extra biblical account in history, okay? And of course, Nahum recorded this in Nahum chapter 1, verse 8, okay? That's how Nineveh fell, okay? There was this overflowing of the river, okay? Nahum chapter 1, verse 8. Let me read this to you. Nahum 1, verse 8. But with an overrunning flood, he will make an utter end of the place thereof, and darkness shall pursue his enemies. So God is so powerful that he can send calamities like river, overflowing water, floods to destroy a nation or country. And right now, folks, although we blame China, right? Dahil sa China, nagkaroon ng virus. But actually, ultimately, God is in control over everything. Okay? So as of today, over 10,000 na ang namatay sa coronavirus as of today. And I think sa Philippines, 17 na, di ba? So I don't know when this will end. Let's continue to pray. I believe God is waking up the people of the world, okay, to get into their senses and to trust Jesus Christ. And I hope that we will find ways to share the gospel to the lost and dying people around us, okay, and hopeless people around us. Okay? So God is in control. He is sovereign over all the nations of the earth, and he is sovereign over Assyria. Okay. Nineveh is known for its cruelest and vilest brutalities. Napakalupit ng mga Assyrians. Okay? And I will tell you kung gaano sila kawalang puso. Okay? How they treat their enemies. It's so brutal. Okay? So inhumane. Okay? For example, writing one of his conquests, Ashur-Nashir-Pal II, he boasted. So this is one of the kings of Assyrians. And he boasted, I stormed the mountain peaks and took them. In the midst of the mighty mountain, I slaughtered them with their blood. I dyed the mountain like red like wool. The heads of their warriors I cut off, and I formed them into a pillar over against their city. Okay, just imagine that. So when Assyrians defeat their enemies, they cut their heads off and they build pillars. Okay, from these heads that they collected, they build pillars. Okay, just to scare their enemies. Their young men and their maidens I burned in the fire. Okay, so that's how brutal Assyrians were. Regarding one captured leader, okay, this Assyrian king said, I flayed him. Binalatan niya. I flayed him, his skin I spread upon the wall of the city. He also wrote of mutilating the bodies of live captives and stacking their corpses in piles. So that's how brutal they are. Okay? Very nakakatakot na mga tao itong mga Assyrians. Okay? Shalmaneser, for example, the second, boasted of his cruelties after one of his campaigns, a pyramid of heads. So di ba, hilig sila mamugot ng ulo? And they built either pillars or pyramids from the heads of their enemies. I reared in front of his city. Their youths and their maidens I burnt up in the flames. And Sennacherib wrote of his enemies, I cut their throats like lambs. I cut off their precious lives as one cuts a string. Like the many waters of a storm, I made the contents of their gullets and entrails run down upon the wide earth. Their hands I cut off. Okay? So, ganyan sila ka. Napakasama nila talaga. Ashurbanipal also described his treatment of a captured leader in these words, I pierced his chin with my keen hand dagger. Through his jaw I passed a rope, but put a dog chain upon him and made him occupy a kennel. In his campaign against Egypt, Ashurbanipal also boasted that his officials hang Egyptian corpses on stakes. So talagang, so you know the stakes, right? It's like a wooden post, right? And so they put this dead body on this wooden post, okay? Stripped of their skins and covered the city walls with them. So that's how cruel, okay, and vile and inhumane they are, okay, with their enemies, okay? Napakasama nila talaga. Nakakatakot sila, okay, na mga enemies. So that's how they show their cruelty, and that's how they show to their enemies that if you will rebel against us, you will become like this, okay? To threaten their enemies. Nahum, no wonder Nahum called Nineveh the city of blood. Jonah described Nahum as a great city. Maybe it speaks of the power, the grandeur of the city. And Nahum also described Nineveh as the city of blood, a city noted for its cruelty. Okay, Nahum chapter 3 verse 1. Let me read to you. Nahum 3:1 and 3:19. Nahum said, woe to the bloody city. It is full of lies and robbery. The prey departed not. Okay, verse 19. There is no healing of thy bruise. Thy wound is grievous. All that hear the bruit of thee shall clap the hands over thee. For upon whom hath not thy wickedness passed continually? So God pronounced judgment on Nineveh. And because he is sovereign over the nations, Nineveh fell in 612 BC, okay, after the prophecy of Nahum. Okay. So aside from their cruelty, the Assyrian kings were proud and egotistic. Okay. So I did not include her their sayings. Okay. Assyrians were also idolatrous. Okay, their national god was Assur, whose high priest and representative was the king. And because of these sins, okay, of the Assyrian Empire, Nahum has to pronounce judgment on them. So when was the book Nahum written? Okay. So we can see some evidences, internal evidences, okay, in the book of Nahum that will point us to a date, okay, of the writing of the book of Nahum. Okay, like for example, the fall of Thebes or Thebes, also known as Snow, in chapter 3, verse 8. So in 663, okay, this collapse of this place is referred to as a past event, okay? And the fall of Nineveh is referred to as a future event, okay? In other words, the book may have been written between 663 and 612 BC, okay? 663 and 612 BC. So the theme of the book of Nahum, destruction of Nineveh, a comfort for the people of God. And in page 104 in your notebook, let me read this to you. Nineveh will be destroyed. Almost every verse from chapter 1, verse 15 to 3, verse 19 describes the event which took place in 612 BC. Okay? The Ninevites or the Assyrians converted through the preaching of Jonah more than 100 years before Nahum wrote, had not transmitted their knowledge. They did not relay what they have learned from that revival of Jonah to his parents. They did not relay their knowledge of Yahweh to their children. And the people had quickly reverted to their cruel and hidden practices. So they had destroyed Samaria, the northern kingdom, in 722 BC, and nearly captured the southern kingdom in 701 BC. Okay? Nahum briefly describes Nineveh, wickedness, okay? In 3 verse 1, it's full of cruelty. They are known for their robbery, okay? They are also known for their immorality and witchcraft, according to chapter 3 verse 4 in Nahum. Okay, let me read to you, Nahum 3 verse 4. Bloody city, verse 1, full of lies. They are known for their lies, their robbery in verse 4. Because of the multitude of the whoredoms of the well-favored harlot. In other words, this country is known for immorality, the mistress of witchcrafts, whoredoms. So they are known for their immorality, and not only for immorality, but also for their whoredoms, their witchcraft. Okay, so God has to pronounce judgment on this wicked, proud, and evil nation. Okay, so that's the book of Nahum. And the book of Nahum can be outlined into 4 parts, okay, as you can see in page 104, okay. Yahweh, the God of Israel, that's the first part in chapter 1, verses 2 to 8. The Nineveh's destruction, chapter 1, 9 to 15. And then chapter 2, 1 to 13 is the prediction of Nineveh's destruction. And then prophetic denunciation of Nineveh in chapter 3, verses 1 to 19. So that's the book of Nahum, okay? So the book of Nahum was written 100 years, over 100 years after the book of Jonah, okay? After the book of Jonah. So we're done with the book of Nahum. Let's go to the book of Habakkuk, okay? If you hear the word Habakkuk, or the book of Habakkuk, what comes to your mind?
Questions?
The righteous shall live by faith.
The righteous shall live by faith. Very good. Okay. Okay, that phrase, that statement in Romans is taken from the book of Habakkuk. The just shall live by faith. And let's find out why Habakkuk said that statement. The just shall live by faith. Okay. So now let me ask you this question. Okay. Did you ask the following questions in your mind? Maybe sometimes in your life, okay, you have some questions, okay? And you ask these questions to God. Like for example, this one, why is there so much oppression? Or why all the injustice? Why do evil men prosper? Okay? Why do the righteous suffer? Why doesn't God do something? Why doesn't God clean up this mess? Why? 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 Okay? Maybe some of you had asked that question before. And you know what? If you ask that question, you are struggling like Habakkuk did. Okay? You are struggling like Habakkuk did because these questions are basically asked by Habakkuk. Habakkuk's questions were answered by God, okay, in this book. And this Q&A dialogue. So the book of Habakkuk is like a Q&A between Habakkuk and Yahweh, okay? This Q&A dialogue between the prophet and God is recorded in the little book called Habakkuk. Okay? So, in what way the book of Habakkuk is unique? Okay? One is that other prophets, whereas other prophets declared God's message to people, okay? Habakkuk dialogued with God about people, okay? So he was not really directly addressing to the people, okay? Pronouncing judgment on the people, okay? He was talking about the people before God, okay? So that's the difference between the other prophets and Habakkuk. Okay, another unique thing about Habakkuk is that most Old Testament prophets proclaim divine judgment. Habakkuk, however, pleaded for divine judgment. Okay? He was not pronouncing judgment on, like, for example, a particular nation. Okay? Okay. Like some parts of the book of Job, the book of Habakkuk is an and Yahweh. So these are three things that make Habakkuk unique, okay? Compared to the other Old Testament prophets, okay? Especially the minor prophets. So let's take a 10-minute break. So let's come back after 4:02, okay?
Hi guys. Hi guys.
Oh.
Abigail, pag-study ba ya? Nag-eskwela pa ba kaya mo? Hi guys. Kumusta na si COVID-19? Uy, meron tayong classmate na si Justin Bieber ah.
Sino yan?
Si Justin Bieber.
Sino?
You know, nakasalamin. Uy, Jeremy, bawal kumakain sa pansit.
Kain din ako.
Pwede
Sampalok.
Pwede magkape. Pwede magkape. Sampalok ka.
Kain.
Kara, come.
Ate Abby.
Ano?
Anyong sa iyo. Anyong
Naglipa.
tao.
Noyo. Ate
Nantok na
Jessie.
nga ako.
Hi.
Hello.
Ay, sarap naman ng
Hi.
sampalok ko.
Ate Michelle,
Ah,
puro,
grabe.
ano eh, mas na mas eh, talagang kailangan protection sa virus eh.
Lumat kami nakakahawa, Ate Michelle. Nakamusta ka pa
Hindi
sa...
naman
Alcohol
kami.
ka, mag-alcohol.
Ay, ganyan.
Ayan may office mo, Abigail. Yung
Kagwapa ba sa tulo ka dalaga?
office mo yan.
Kadua ka dalaga. Kagwapa.
Atin. Hello.
Ano yan? Ano ginagawa mo dyan? Diyan ka nag-aaral. Ganun.
Well, Lance, bawal daw magsalita pag walang video.
Ayoko mag-video. Wala akong
Labas
private,
mo,
wala akong
labas mo ng
private
mukha
room.
mo.
Ayoko, wala akong private room eh. Kasi pag dito tinatawagan ako, pinapatayo ako kagad.
Hi.
Kaya hindi ako nag-video.
Wow.
Abby from Vietnam.
Si Dr. Rata napalibutan ng tatlong mga agad ng babae.
Say hi, Hannah. Say hi. Hi, Abby. Vietnam. From Vietnam. Kara. Ate Viola. Where's Ate Viola? We cannot see Ate Viola.
Hala, walang...
Wait lang.
Walang... Yeah.
Hi!
Viola. Viola.
Heroes.
The com is choosing after you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Patanong sa imong anak dong, be. Patanong sa imong anak dong.
Hello.
Wow.
Hey. Basta na po. Basta na-
Ang ganda
basta-
naman.
Tara. Bye-bye. See ya.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Si bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Lagi giliwatan.
Not you.
Iba po ang samahan. Gwapo
Hello
ko
po.
ng mga anak. Gwapo ko ng mga anak. Mute na
Okay,
ako.
let's... Okay, kindly put your name for the second hour. Very good. Write your name for the second hour. Okay, do you have other questions? Okay na lahat? Okay. Okay, let's continue our discussion. PowerPoint. So we're done with the book of Nahum. Let's go to Hab. Okay, we're done with Hab. Okay. So we talk about the uniqueness of the book of Habakkuk. And the authorship of the book, Habakkuk may mean embrace or embracer. And there is a reason behind that. Can you see it? Can you see this, class? I'm sorry. Okay. So embrace or embracer, and there is a reason. why his name that way? The meaning of his name may mean that Habakkuk embraced his people to comfort them, or by giving them, okay? Or that he embraced the problem of divine justice in a wicked world, according to Jerome. Or it could be understood in the passive sense. Habakkuk was embraced by God as his child and messenger. So either way, okay, we can understand his name Habakkuk, either in an active sense, embrace, or in a passive sense, he was embraced by God. Okay. Like Obadiah, no biographical or geographical information is given to Habakkuk in chapter 1, verse 1. So he is one of the three prophetic writers who is described as the prophet. Okay, the prophet. Okay, the other two prophets who are described this way are Haggai and Zechariah. Okay, and he is the only pre-exilic writer to be designated as such. Okay. So when was the book of Habakkuk written? The mention of the Chaldeans. Okay, if you encounter that word Chaldeans, that's another synonym for the term Babylonians. Okay, and sometimes it refers to a specific part of Babylon, the southern part of Babylon, but it can also refer to generally to the Babylonians. Okay. So the mention of the Chaldeans in 1 verse 6 implies a date after the fall of Nineveh, okay, and the Assyrian Empire in 612 BC. The exploitation of the poor in chapter 1 verses 2 to 4 implies a date after the death of Josiah, okay, in 609 BC. Since Habakkuk warns of the Babylonians' conquest, okay, and the first conquest was in 605, right? The first phase of the captivity of the southern kingdom. The book can be dated 607 to 606 BC. Okay? 607 to 606 BC. Okay? In other words, maybe 1 or 2 years before the first phase of captivity took place, Habakkuk pronounced this, made this prophecy. Okay. So the theme of Habakkuk is this: okay, problems are solved by faith in Yahweh. Okay, problems are solved by faith in Yahweh. Okay. So if you see the outline in your notebook, page 105. Okay. We can see the arrangement of this book. Okay. The book of Habakkuk is composed of two dialogues between Yahweh and Habakkuk. The first dialogue is from chapter 1 verse 2 to chapter 1 verse 11. And that's the second and third part of your outline, okay, in your notebook in page 105. If you see it, Habakkuk's first complaint and then God's answer. Okay, Habakkuk's first complaint is this: why does the evil in Judah go unpunished? Okay, and God answered that complaint: the Babylonians will punish Judah. Okay, that's the first dialogue between Habakkuk and Yahweh. Okay, the second dialogue is from chapter 1 verse 12 until chapter 2 verse 20. Okay. So in this dialogue, Habakkuk raised his second complaint. How can a just God use a wicked country like Babylon to punish a people more righteous than themselves? It is unjust. Okay. That's the contention of Habakkuk. And God answered that complaint by saying that Babylon will be punished also, and faith will be rewarded. And that's where we read the statement of Habakkuk, that just shall, that was God's statement, the just shall live by faith. In chapter 2, verse 4. And let me read to you Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4. Okay. Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just God himself, okay, who said these words, the just shall live by his faith. So this is the context of this famous statement which Paul quoted in the book of Romans, okay? So basically, the book of Habakkuk has two dialogues, okay? The first dialogue is in chapter 1, and the second dialogue is from chapter 1, verse 12 to chapter 2, verse 20, okay? And the last part of Habakkuk is his prayer, okay? The prayer of Habakkuk. After seeking for manifestations of God's wrath and mercy, as he has seen in the past, he closes with a confession of trust and joy. And the last three verses of Habakkuk is very famous. Okay, and let me read to you the last three verses of Habakkuk. Habakkuk said, although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive shall fail, and the field shall yield no meat. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he will make my feet like hinds' feet, and he will make me to walk upon mine high places. So in these three verses, Habakkuk expressed his trust in the Lord in spite of what's happening around him, okay? And it's very interesting that Habakkuk in this verse says that his joy is in the Lord. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. And this verse reminds me of what Paul says in the book of Philippians. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. And we can relate with Habakkuk in these verses. You know what? In our ministry, we labor a lot. We serve the Lord faithfully. Pero parang walang bunga sa ating paglilingkod sa Panginoon. Di ba? Wala tayong nakikitang bunga. We do not see any fruit. And that is the testimony of Habakkuk. But in spite of everything, in spite of the seeming fruitlessness of our ministry, we should rejoice in the Lord. Okay? We should trust the Lord. Our real joy is not in the service that we do for God. Our real joy is not even in the response of people from our ministry. Remember Jeremiah. Okay, he is the weeping prophet. Okay, all of the people kind of rebelled against him. There was no positive response from his message. Okay? But just like Habakkuk, I hope that this is also our testimony that our joy is not in the thing that we do for the Lord or the response of the people in our ministry. Okay? Our joy should be in the fact that we are in the Lord. Just like Paul said in the book of Philippians, rejoice in the Lord always. That means focus in your relationship with God. Okay? Not in the things that you do for God, but in your relationship with God, or the faithfulness of God in your life, or who God is in your life. That should be our focus. Okay? That should be our focus. And if that is our focus, that will give us encouragement. God will strengthen us. Habakkuk says in verse 19, the Lord God is my strength, and he will make my feet like hinds' feet, and he will make me to walk upon mine high places. So real joy does not come from our service or the response of people. Real joy comes from our relationship with the Lord. And the fact that God is faithful, okay? Who God is, okay? That should give us real rejoicing, okay? So that's the book of Habakkuk, okay? So let's turn to the book of Zephaniah, okay? The book of Zephaniah, okay? So remember the theme of Habakkuk, problems are solved by faith in Yahweh. Okay? Zephaniah. Okay? I haven't heard somebody preaching from the book of Zephaniah. Okay? Maybe one of you, okay, will share a message from the book of Zephaniah. Okay? A lot of these books are neglected by preachers. Okay? The name Zephaniah means Yahweh has hidden. And why do you think Zephaniah was named this way? This may point to God's protection of his people during the impending difficulties in Zephaniah's day. Okay? Or to God's protection of Zephaniah in his childhood during Manasseh's wicked reign. So Yahweh hid either the people, his people, or Yahweh protected or hid Zephaniah from Manasseh's wicked reign. So either of those two interpretations, okay, would work. In chapter 1, verse 1, okay, Zephaniah's ancestry is traced back to 4 generations. It's very unique. That is very unique. Let us read this. Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 1. You notice this. The word of the Lord which came unto Zephaniah, the son of Cushi, the son of Gedaliah, the son of Amariah, the son of Hezekiah. Now, what does this genealogy tell us about the identity of Zephaniah? Any implication of this genealogy? Okay, what does this genealogy or ancestry tell us about Zephaniah, the identity of Zephaniah? Anybody would like to guess?
He had royal lineage.
Viola, are you saying something?
Erica po. He had royal lineage.
Yes, Erica. Pardon, Erica, I'm sorry.
He had royal lineage.
Yes, he may come from a rich or prominent background. Is that what you are trying to say, Erica?
Na galing po siya sa mga kings.
Galing siya sa mga kings?
Kings. Kings po, hari.
Hari, okay. So royal background, okay. Very good guess. Sorry about that. Sorry. Okay. So Erica might be right. This implies, okay, these 4 generations in chapter 1, verse 1 implies that Zephaniah was a man of prominence and even of royalty. Remember in the book of Matthew chapter 1, and I think in Luke chapter 3, a long list of genealogy just to identify Jesus Christ because he is a royalty. Same case, I think, in regard to the identity of Zephaniah. As the great-great-grandson of Hezekiah, king of Judah, Zephaniah was the only known Old Testament prophet with such high social standing. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, yung lineage na from King Hezekiah. Okay? He was thus a distant relative of King Josiah, in whose reign he prophesied. Okay? In his reign, he prophesied. Also, the prophet may have been a resident of Jerusalem because of his words from this place and his familiarity with the city. So that is Zephaniah, okay, his identity. So he may come from a royal background, okay, royal background. Okay. According to chapter 1, verse 1, Zephaniah's ministry was during the reign of King Josiah. Okay. Zephaniah preached against the sins of Judah before it led to Josiah's revival. Okay, remember Josiah, he began his reign when he was 8 years old, right? And then he led a revival. And before that took place, Zephaniah was instrumental, okay, for this revival. Now, if Zephaniah delivered this message before Josiah's revival and before the fall of Nineveh, which Josiah mentioned in chapter 2, verse 13, then this book may be dated in the earlier part of Josiah's reign, okay? In the earlier part of Josiah's reign, in 625 BC. So that is the date of the writing of the book of Zephaniah, okay? So why was this book written? Okay, what was the background of the writing of the book of Zephaniah? Okay, before Josiah's reign, Manasseh, remember? And his son Ammon, okay? These are Josiah's predecessors, okay? Manasseh and Ammon. They propagated idolatry into Judah, okay? According to 2 Kings 21, 4-5. Altars were built for Baal worship and the worship of sun, moon, and stars. Okay, not stars, okay? Stars. Manasseh also made a carved Asherah pole and placed it in the temple. According to 2 Kings 21, verse 7. And child sacrifice and astrology were also practiced, okay, during their reigns, okay? Manasseh's son Ammon continued these evil practices until his assassination. Okay, these should be plural, these, not this. Okay, sorry. Until his assassination. So Zephaniah's ministry, prophetic ministry, may have begun at the beginning of Josiah's reign to combat the effects of Manasseh's and Ammon's evil practices in Judah. Okay? If his ministry was after Josiah's reform, then Zephaniah's prophecy was given because Judah spurned the religious revival under Josiah. So Old Testament scholars are divided as to when Zephaniah, this book was written. The book of Zephaniah was written either, was this written before the revival or after the revival? For now, let us say that this book was written before the revival, and Zephaniah's prophecy was instrumental for the revival that took place during the time of the revival. Then this book was written because Judah, okay, they ignored what happened during that revival. So they reverted back to their old ways. Okay, they spurned the religious revival under Josiah. So actually, either way would work. Okay, but for now, let us say that Zephaniah was written before the revival of Josiah. Okay. So the theme of Zephaniah is this: Jerusalem and the nations in the day of the Lord. Jerusalem and the nations in the day of the Lord. And you know what? The expression day of the Lord is used more frequently in Zephaniah than in any other Old Testament book. Okay? So this expression is used, okay, most often by Zephaniah than any other Old Testament book. Thus, the theme of this book is the impending judgment of God on Judah for its disobedience. And one Old Testament writer states that the theme of Zephaniah is this: the severity and goodness of God. Love cannot excuse sin, but will at last find a way to realize its purpose in spite of all the sin of his people. And we can outline Zephaniah into two parts. Okay, number one is in chapter 1, verse 2 to chapter 3, verse 8. Okay, that's the first aspect of the day of the Lord, the day of the Lord in judgment. Okay, we think of the day of the Lord as negative, it's judgment, but there is a positive side of the day of the Lord. Okay, and that's the second part of Zephaniah in chapter 3, verses 9 to 20. The day of the Lord in restoration. In other words, the day of the Lord does not only bring judgment, it also brings blessings. Okay? The day of the Lord brings not only judgment, but also blessing. Okay? So that is Zephaniah. Now let's go to Haggai, the book of Haggai. Okay? The book of Haggai. Usually, ang Haggai, ginagamit ito sa mga preacher pag hindi pa tapos yung church building, di ba? Di ba? Haggai agad. Kasi kailangan natin tapusin yung church building natin. Mag-preach tayo from the book of Haggai. Kasi yun naman ang mensahe ni Haggai. Hindi pa kasi tapos yung temple. Okay? Yung mga Hudyo na nasa Jerusalem, they were discouraged to build the temple. So si Haggai ang ginamit ng Panginoon to encourage the people in Jerusalem to continue the reconstruction of the temple. The book of Haggai, Obadiah. Okay? Maybe one takeaway from OTI is knowing the shortest book and the second shortest book. Okay? Obadiah and then Haggai. Okay? Haggai was the first prophet through whom God spoke to the post-exilic Judean community. So, who are the other two prophets? To the Jews in the during the post-exilic era. Okay, aside from Haggai, it is the last two Old Testament prophets, Zechariah and Malachi. So there are the three post-exilic prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Okay. The messages. So we can outline the book of Haggai into four, okay, because there are four messages, okay, by Haggai, a seemingly insignificant post-exilic prophet whose ministry was apparently of limited duration. Okay. His four messages are all dated in the second year of Darius I, okay, 520 BC. And soon he was joined by the prophet Zechariah, who continued and completed the task of encouraging the people to rebuild the temple. Okay. Let me read to you this quotation. Notable in Haggai's ministry is his self-awareness of the divine origin of his messages. No less than 25 times in his two short chapters, Haggai affirmed the divine authority of his messages. Not only did he introduce his sermons with "This is what the Lord Almighty says," but also he concluded his sermons with a similar formula, "Declares the Lord Almighty," and sprinkled those expressions throughout his messages. In other words, Haggai recognized, okay, he was fully aware he was God's messenger. He really recognized himself as God's instrument, okay, as God's divine instrument. And Haggai is as an example for us, preachers and teachers of God's word. Okay, we should only preach and teach what God's word says. Okay, not more than that. Okay. What the Bible says, we should focus on that. Okay, that is the testimony of Haggai. Okay, he was faithful in pronouncing, in declaring what God says. Okay, what God would like to say to His people. Okay? And I hope that is also our practice. Okay, to only speak or teach what the Bible says. Haggai's reference to Solomon's temple in chapter 2, verse 3 may indicate that he was one of the exiles who saw it destroyed in 586 BC. So during this time of Haggai's ministry, he was ministering to the post-exilic community. In other words, kung nakita niya yung temple ng Solomon's temple which was destroyed, ibig sabihin, matanda na talaga si Haggai. Kasi nabuhay siya during the captivity hanggang natapos ang captivity. Therefore, he was an old man, probably when he preached, okay, if he really saw the destruction of Solomon's temple. Okay. So let us study the background of the writing of this book. Okay. Cyrus the Great made a decree for the Jews in the captivity to return to their homeland, right? Do you remember the date of the decree of Cyrus? When did Cyrus decree? For the Jews to return to their homeland. Remember that? Anybody would like to answer? 538 BC, okay? That 538 BC, that 538 BC. Okay, Cyrus made a decree for the Jews to return to their homeland. And 50,000 Jews returned to Jerusalem with Zerubbabel, accompanied by Joshua, the high priest, and the prophets Haggai and Zechariah. Okay? And in the second year of the return, the foundation of the temple was laid. However, the rebuilding was stopped kasi mayroong mga hadlang from the outsiders, mga Samaritan. They were harassed. And of course, the Persian, okay? There was this outside pressure that made them stop, okay, the rebuilding of the temple. So this resulted to spiritual apathy, and for about 16 more years, the construction of the temple was stopped. It was discontinued. It's 16 more years. Just imagine that. Okay? Siguro karamihan sa inyo dito, meron kayong church building, hindi pa natapos, di ba? For how many years? Okay? Discourage yung mga believers. Okay? I remember sa church namin sa Mindanao hanggang ngayon, hindi pa tapos ang church building. Okay? Kung pwede nga lang, si Haggai ay mag-preach church namin doon sa Mindanao para matapos na yung church building. Kasi 30 years na yung church namin. Hindi pa rin tapos. Okay? Ang church building. Okay? So, this is the history behind the writing of the book of Haggai. But in the second year of Darius, God raised up Haggai the prophet to confront their spiritual lethargy and encourage them to rebuild the temple. Okay? Let us read Ezra chapter 5, 1 and 2. Okay? Ezra 5, 1 and 2. Okay. If you notice, the verse prior to chapter 5, verse 1, okay? Notice this, in chapter 4, verse 24, then ceased the work of the house of God, which is at Jerusalem. Nahinto. So it ceased unto the second year of Darius, of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Then the prophets, Haggai the prophet, and Zechariah the son of Iddo prophesied unto the Jews. Now my question is this, how long was the interval between chapter 4 verse 24 and chapter 5 verse 1? I mentioned to you already. How many years? Between chapter 4 verse 24 and chapter 5 verse 1. How long was the interval? How many years was the interval?
po.
16 years, di ba? 16 years. Just imagine that. Nahinto for 16 years, walang nangyari. Okay? And then dumating si Haggai. That's chapter 5 verse 1. So 16 years after, okay, chapter 4 verse 24, dumating si Haggai. Okay, he preached to the lethargic, discouraged people of Judah na magpatuloy, okay, sa gawain ng Panginoon. Okay? Sorry about that. Okay. Haggai's initial success. So nagtagumpay. He was successful. Haggai was successful in his ministry in encouraging the Jews. And this success was supplemented, okay, by the continued efforts of Zechariah until the temple construction was finished. Natapos finally yung temple construction. Buti na lang ginamit ng Diyos si Haggai at si Zechariah. Okay? Nagtulong silang dalawa para ma-encourage ang mga nanlupaypay, na-discourage ng mga tao ng Panginoon. Okay? Ano sa Tagalog yung people? Jeremy, ano sa Tagalog yung people? People of God.
Tao ng Diyos.
Tao ng Diyos? Okay. Iniisip ko kasi ano, katawan. Mga katawan sa Diyos. Okay. Tao ng Diyos. Okay. So they were discouraged and Zechariah and Haggai encouraged them. At nagtagumpay sila. They were successful in their ministry. Natapos ang temple 515 BC. Okay? So the theme of Zephaniah, rebuilding the temple. No, and Haggai, rebuilding the temple, God's program deserves top priority. Rebuilding the temple, God's program deserves top priority. And remember, Haggai presented 4 messages, okay? And in your outline, page 107, okay? We can outline the book into 4 parts based on Haggai's 4 messages, okay? So, makikita niyo yan in 100, page 107 in your notebook. So, rebuilding the temple, God's program deserves top priority. That's the theme of the book of Haggai. Now, let's go to Zechariah. Okay, sorry. Now, I would like to show to you the outline of Haggai based on the Bible Knowledge Commentary. Okay. So, I told you 4 messages, diba? Haggai presented 4 messages. So the first, and we can outline this book into 4. The first message, a judgment call to rebuild the temple, chapter 1. Second message begins in chapter 2, verse 1. A prophetic promise of the future glory of the temple. Third message begins in chapter 2, verse 10. A priestly decision to illustrate the present blessings of his children of obedience. And the fourth message begins in chapter 2, verse 20, a messianic prophecy concerning Zerubbabel. So that's how we can outline the book of Haggai, okay? According to the Bible Knowledge Commentary. So let's go to Zechariah. So by the way, what we are doing here is just introduction, right? We are not delving deeply into the book. We are just doing a surface overview of these books. That's why it's called Old Testament Introduction. Introduction pa lang to, okay? So that's why hindi pa to talagang yung pinaka-deep na mga katotohanan na ating mabasa sa mga libro ito. Okay? So title and authorship. Okay, one the most messianic, the most truly apocalyptic and eschatological of all the writings of the Old Testament. Okay? I may ask that question in your exam. Okay, the most messianic, the most truly apocalyptic and eschatological of all the writings of all the Old Testament. Zechariah was a post-exilic, the second post-exilic prophet. The first is, who was the first post-exilic prophet? Haggai, diba? Haggai. So second, Zechariah. And Zechariah was a prophet and a Levite, born in Babylon. In other words, that Zechariah is both a prophet and a priest. Ezra and Nehemiah referred to him as a descendant of Iddo, implying perhaps that his father had died young, because he is not described from the name of his father, but based on the name of his grandfather. Okay? So perhaps his father had died young, and Zechariah became the successor of his grandfather, whose name is Iddo. Okay? Someday, kung mayroon kayong anak, pangalanan niyo yung anak niyo na Iddo. Okay? Para maiba naman. So like Jeremiah and Ezekiel before him, Zechariah was both a prophet and a priest. Okay? Just like Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Palagi na lang kasi Jeremiah, di ba, yung pangalan? Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Iddo naman para maiba. Okay. Zechariah means Yahweh remembers. Okay, according to chapter 1, verse 1. Chapter 7, verse 1 and 8, verse 1. The prophet who wrote these prophecies. So we can divide the book of Zechariah into 2 parts. Chapter 1 to 8 were written before the temple was complete, as Zechariah ministered with Haggai in 520 to 518 BC. Okay? So how many chapters Zechariah has? 14 chapters, right? 14 chapters. So the first part was written. Okay? Chapters 1 to 8 was written before the completion of the temple. The the second half of the book, chapters 9 to 14, were probably written approximately 480 BC. Okay, after the completion of the temple. Okay, because Greece is mentioned. Okay, so that is just a theory, but this may be true. Okay, the theme of Zechariah, Messiah and restoration, a theological basis for rebuilding the temple. Okay, a theological basis for rebuilding the temple. Okay. Wait. Okay. So, ministering at the same time as Haggai, Zechariah sought to motivate the people to rebuild the temple by the certain future God would give them, instead of focusing on their present lack or the prosperity of the wicked nation around them. Israel was to believe the truth of Zechariah's message. Okay? Though through the Messiah, God's people will be preserved from hostile powers and will eventually enjoy his kingdom over the whole earth. Okay? So we can outline the book of Zechariah into 8 parts. Okay? That's the introduction. Then the 8 visions. You can read a lot of visions in the book of Zechariah. That's why somebody says it's the most apocalyptic. Okay? From chapter 1 verse 7 to chapter 6 verse 15, there's 8 visions, and those 8 visions talk about God's program of the restoration for Judah and Jerusalem. Okay? And there's the questions about fasting, the 3rd part. Okay? And the 2 prophetic oracles. Okay? This is very interesting. Chapter 9 verse 1 to chapter 14 verse 21, the 2 advents of Messiah. Okay? This is prophesied in Zechariah, the 2 comings of the Messiah. Okay? We are still waiting for the second coming of Jesus Christ, right? Natapos na, na-fulfill na ang first advent, first coming of the Messiah. And the second coming is coming. Okay? We are still awaiting, and God will fulfill that promise. Who knows? Maybe after the coronavirus, darating ng Panginoon. Who knows? Okay? And to the first advent, okay, that's the last part of Zechariah, the rejection of the Messiah and its consequences. It's very interesting that before Messiah, before his first coming, Zechariah prophesied that. And it was fulfilled. Therefore, the second coming of Messiah will also be fulfilled. Kaya, mga kapatid, magpatuloy tayong maglingkod sa Panginoon at mamuhay na maayos at kalugod-lugod sa Panginoon, because darating ang Panginoon. Okay? Darating ang Panginoon. Zechariah prophesied this, and God will fulfill this prophecy. Okay? And the last part is the second advent and beyond, the return and reign of the Messiah. Okay? So that's the second post-exilic prophet, Zechariah, and the second to the last book of the Old Testament. And the last book is no other than Malachi. Okay? Not Malachi, but Malachi. Okay. Malachi ministered 100 years after Cyrus issued the decree in 538 BC, allowing the Jews to return from exile to Judah. So Malachi is the last post-exilic prophet. By the time of Malachi's prophecy, the temple had been reconstructed. Remember, during the time of Haggai and Zechariah, they faced a different problem, di ba? Ang mga tao discouraged, hindi pa natapos yung temple, discouraged sila. But during the time of Malachi, natapos na yung temple, iba na naman ang kinaharap ng propeta. Okay? Ibang kasalanan naman ang dapat i-confront. Okay? So thanks to the prophetic ministry of Haggai and Zechariah, prompting the people to finish the reconstruction. Okay? Most likely in Malachi's day, the wall of Jerusalem, okay, not only the temple, but the wall also was being rebuilt or had been completed, okay, by Nehemiah's crew. Okay? And although the temple and the wall were already in place, life was not easy during this time. Okay? Among the post-exilic Judean community, the Jews were under the political dominion of Persia. Harvests were poor and subject to locust damage. Most hearts were indifferent or resentful toward God. Both the priests and the people were violating the stipulations of the Mosaic law regarding sacrifices, tithes, and offerings. Diba? Sa Book of Malachi, mababasa natin yung offering ng mga priests. Yung mga defects, okay? Yung mga defectiveness, that's where they offered. Okay? So Yahweh has to confront that kind of worship. Okay? The people's hope in God's covenant promises had dimmed as evidenced by their intermarriages with pagans, maraming divorces ang nangyayari, and general moral ambivalence. So Malachi is probably the authors, is the author of this book, although it may mean my messenger. Okay? And he is the last prophet in the Old Testament before John the Baptist, whom Malachi predicted in chapter 3, verse 1. Okay? Malachi preached against the sins of Nehemiah, the sins that Nehemiah corrected, okay? Just before Nehemiah arrived. So that's how the connection between Malachi and Nehemiah. Okay? So before Nehemiah arrived, Malachi preached to the people of Judah. Okay? And Malachi wrote his prophecy around 435 BC. Okay? Now, what's the style of Malachi? Okay? In contrast to the other prophets, whose style is giving direct pronouncement, the proclamation to the people, Malachi introduced each of his 6 messages. Okay? 6 messages by a charge or command addressed to the people. Malachi then characterized the people as questioning 5 of the 6 charges, each one except the third one, point 4 in the outline. Then he offered proof that each charge was correct. This style was an appropriate way to confront the apathetic Israelites. In your notebook in page 109, it mentions about 8 times the Lord brings an accusation against Israel. Okay, 8 times, diba, in your notebook. But actually, there are only 6. Okay, 6 messages in the book of Malachi, and maybe there's 8 questions in all, and some of these questions can be grouped into one. But all in all, there are 6 messages in the book of Malachi. Okay, so here are the 6 messages. Okay, in your notebook. Okay, this is how your notebook outlined the book of Malachi. The introduction, and then the last part is the conclusion, and in between introduction and conclusion are the 6 messages of Malachi. This is in your notebook. Okay, blindness to the love of God, is service to the great King, and faithfulness in human covenants, criticism of God's justice, disobedience to the Lord's statutes, and belief in the value of serving God. So those are the 6 messages. Okay, in the book of Malachi. Theme, only 3 words: against empty ritualism. Okay, against empty ritualism. And that's end. Okay, tamang-tama, 4:50 na. Okay, so prepare for your exam. Okay, your exam covers from the book of Ezra until Malachi. Okay, and hopefully I can post an update on the BJMBC webpage maybe tomorrow, okay, regarding the pointers for your exam. Okay, do you know when are you going to take the exam? Did Dr. K mention that to you? Hindi nyo pa alam? Okay, so I will give you an update. Okay, I will post that on the BJMBC webpage under class announcement. So again, the exam covers from Ezra to Malachi, and there will be no discussion. There will be no short answer. It will be either true or false, matching, or multiple choice. Okay. So I think it will be 150 points. I forgot how many points was your first exam? Was it 150 points? So maybe 150 points. So maybe 2 points per answer. So make sure that you familiarize, okay, the book. And I will give you the pointers. Okay, I will post that on the BJMBC webpage. Any questions? You have any questions?
Wala naman po.
Okay, always take care, take vitamins, exercise, okay? Baka pagkita natin next semester, mataba na kayong lahat, no? Read books, okay? Spend quality time with your parents, your loved ones, okay? Again, thank you very much for your patience. I know it's a very difficult hour of the day, 3 o'clock to 5 p.m. Okay, inaantok talaga. Naintindihan ko kayo. And thank you for all the effort you put into this class. And I hope that you will do well in your final exam. Okay? So, and that ends our class. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you po.
Thank you.